Egypt had become a land of fear. The Israelites were multiplying. But Pharaoh saw their growth as a threat. His cruel command brought suffering upon an entire people. Yet, in the middle of darkness, one child was hidden from death. His name was Moses. Raised in Pharaoh's palace but born a Hebrew, Moses would one day stand before the burning bush and hear a voice that would change history forever. I am who I am. From slavery to the wilderness to a divine calling, the story of Exodus was about to begin. The story begins with 70 souls, the sons of Jacob who moved to Egypt: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. Joseph was already established in Egypt. In time, Joseph passed away, along with all his brothers and that entire generation. Yet the children of Israel were extraordinarily fruitful. They grew, multiplied rapidly, and became exceedingly mighty, until the entire land was filled with them. Then, a new king arose over Egypt who had no regard for Joseph or his legacy. Seeing the swelling population of the Israelites, fear took hold of him. He said to his people, "Look, the children of Israel are becoming far too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply further. If a war breaks out, they might join our enemies, fight against us, and escape from the land." Driven by fear, the Egyptians appointed harsh taskmasters over the Israelites to afflict them with heavy burdens. They forced them to build the supply cities of Pithom and Ramses for Pharaoh. When hard labor failed to stop their growth, Pharaoh devised a sinister plan. He summoned 2 Hebrew midwives, named Shiphrah and Puah, and gave them a horrific order. When you serve as midwives to the Hebrew women and look upon the birth stools, if it is a son, kill him. But if it is a daughter, let her live. But Shiphrah and Puah feared God more than Pharaoh. They defied the king's decree and saved the newborn boys. When Pharaoh summoned them and asked, "Why have you done this thing?" The midwives answered courageously, "Because Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwife even arrives." But a divine mystery unfolded. The more the Egyptians oppressed them, the more the Israelites multiplied and spread. This filled the Egyptians with dread and resentment. They made the lives of the Israelites bitter with grueling labor, mixing mortar, molding bricks, and enduring hard work in the fields. Every task was demanded with uncompromising severity. God dealt kindly with the midwives because they honored him, establishing families for them. And the nation of Israel continued to grow and become immensely powerful. Outraged by his failure, Pharaoh issued a brutal decree to all his people. Every newborn son born to the Hebrews must be thrown into the Nile River. But every daughter you shall save alive. And so ends Exodus chapter 1, setting the stage for a light to shine in the darkest hour. The birth of a deliverer named Moses. Chapter 2 of Exodus ends with a deep sense of danger and fierce maternal devotion. A Levite woman gives birth to a son who is beautiful, and she hides him for 3 months. When she can no longer conceal him, she weaves an ark of papyrus, waterproofs it with bitumen and pitch, and sets it among the reeds of the Nile. Miraculously, Pharaoh's own daughter discovers the child, has compassion on him, and unknowingly hires the boy's own mother to nurse him. Named Moses, meaning drawn out of the water, he grows up in the royal court, straddling 2 worlds, his Hebrew heritage and his Egyptian upbringing. As a grown man, Moses witnesses the brutal oppression of his people. Overcome by righteous anger, he slays an Egyptian taskmaster who was beating a Hebrew worker, hiding the body in the sand. When his actions are discovered, the next day, revealed by the very Hebrew men he tried to defend, Pharaoh seeks his life. Moses flees across the desert to the land of Midian, where he finds refuge at a well. There, he defends the 7 daughters of Jethro, Reuel, from hostile shepherds watering their flocks. He is welcomed into their home, marries Zipporah, and has a son named Gershom, living as a foreigner in a strange land. Meanwhile, Back in Egypt, the suffering under bondage intensifies, and the cries of the Israelites rise up to God. Hearing their groaning, God remembers his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, turning his merciful gaze toward his people. And a man went from the house of Levi, taking a daughter of Levi as his wife. And she conceived and bore a son who was so fair that she hid him for 3 months. But when he could no longer be concealed, she took an ark of papyrus, daubing it with bitumen and pitch, and laid the child among the reeds by the river's edge while his sister stood afar off to watch. Down to the water came Pharaoh's daughter to bathe, and seeing the ark among the reeds, she sent her slave girl to fetch it, opening it to find a weeping babe and having pity on him, knowing he was one of the Hebrews' sons, quick to act. The sister stepped forward and offered to call a Hebrew nurse, bringing the child's own mother to care for him for wages, until he grew and was brought to Pharaoh's daughter to become her son, named Moses because she drew him out of the water. Years passed, and Moses, now grown, went out to his brethren, saw their heavy burdens, and witnessed an Egyptian striking a Hebrew. Looking this way and that, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. When the next day came and 2 Hebrews strove together, Moses questioned the guilty one, only to be met with the fearful defiance of a man asking, who made him a ruler and a judge, threatening exposure for the dead Egyptian. Fearing for his life as Pharaoh sought to kill him, Moses fled into the dry expanse of the land of Midian, sitting down weary by a well. There, the 7 daughters of the priest of Midian came to draw water for their flocks, and when aggressive shepherds drove them away, Moses stood up, rescued them, and watered their sheep, brought before their father Reuel, who asked why they had returned so quickly. The daughters spoke of the Egyptian who had delivered them and drawn water for their flocks, prompting Reuel to invite the stranger in to break bread. Content to stay, Moses dwelt with the man, who gave him his daughter Zipporah, and she bore a son whom he named Gershom, declaring himself a stranger in a strange land. Across the miles and years, the king of Egypt died, but the children of Israel groaned in their bondage, their cries piercing the heavens, until God heard their sorrow, remembered his ancient covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, looked upon his people, and acknowledged them. For 40 years, Moses had lived far from the palaces of Egypt. Once a prince, he was now a humble shepherd, caring for the flock of his father-in-law, Jethro, in the wilderness of Midian. Day after day, he led the sheep across the dry hills and rocky valleys, living a quiet life that seemed far removed from the destiny he once imagined. Yet God had not forgotten him. Every step Moses took through the wilderness was preparing him for the greatest mission of his life. One ordinary day, while leading the flock near Mount Horeb, the mountain of God, Moses noticed something extraordinary. A bush was engulfed in flames, yet it was not consumed. The fire burned brightly, but the branches remained untouched. Amazed by this impossible sight, Moses turned aside to investigate. The miracle itself was not the main message. God was drawing Moses closer because he was about to reveal his purpose. As Moses approached, a voice called from the midst of the burning bush, "Moses, Moses." Immediately Moses answered, "Here I am." God then warned him not to come any closer and commanded him to remove his sandals, because the ground on which he stood was holy. This was not because the earth itself possessed special power, but because God's holy presence had filled that place. Overwhelmed with fear and reverence, Moses obeyed. Then God declared, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." Hearing these words, Moses covered his face because he was afraid to look upon God. The Lord then revealed the reason for his appearance. He had seen the suffering of his people in Egypt. He had heard their cries under cruel slavery and knew every sorrow they endured. Their pain had never escaped his notice. God was not distant or indifferent. He was about to act. He promised to rescue Israel from the hands of the Egyptians and bring them into a rich and spacious land flowing with milk and honey. The land promised long ago to Abraham and his descendants. Then came the unexpected command, God said that Moses himself would go to Pharaoh and lead the Israelites out of Egypt. Moses was overwhelmed. He looked at himself and saw only weakness. "Who am I?" he asked, "that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt?" Moses focused on his own inability, but God shifted his attention to the only thing that truly mattered. God did not answer by praising Moses or listing his strengths. Instead, he simply said, "I will be with you." The success of the mission would not depend on Moses' power but on God's presence. Still uncertain, Moses asked another question. If the Israelites asked who had sent him, what name should he give? God answered with one of the greatest revelations in all Scripture, "I am that I am." This name revealed God's eternal nature. Unlike every created being, God depends on no one for his existence. He has no beginning and no end. He is unchanging, self-existent, faithful, and always present. The God who spoke to Abraham generations earlier was the same. God now speaking to Moses. His promises had never failed. God instructed Moses to gather the elders of Israel and tell them that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had remembered his covenant and had seen everything happening in Egypt. The time for deliverance had arrived. God promised that the elders would listen to Moses and stand with him as they approached Pharaoh. Together, they would request permission to journey into the wilderness to worship the Lord. But God also revealed what would happen next. Pharaoh's heart would remain hard. He would refuse to release the Israelites, even after hearing God's command. Yet this resistance would not stop God's plan. Instead, it would become the stage on which God's mighty power would be displayed. God promised that he would stretch out his hand with miraculous signs and powerful judgments against Egypt. Only then would Pharaoh finally let Israel go. The Lord also assured Moses that his people would not leave Egypt as defeated slaves. He would give them favor in the eyes of the Egyptians. Their neighbors would willingly give them silver, gold, and clothing, so that Israel would leave with the wealth of the nation that had oppressed them for generations. This was not theft, but God's justice, providing compensation after centuries of forced labor and suffering. Exodus chapter 3 is the turning point in the story of redemption. It reveals a God who sees every tear, hears every cry, remembers every promise, and acts at exactly the right time. It teaches that God often prepares his servants in hidden seasons before calling them into public purpose. It reminds us that God's calling is never based on human ability, but on his faithful presence. Above all, this chapter introduces the eternal God, the great I Am, whose power, holiness, mercy, and faithfulness remain unchanged throughout every generation. From the flames of a bush that was never consumed came the beginning of Israel's deliverance, proving that when God speaks, history changes forever. If this story inspired you, like this video, share it with others, and comment below, what do you think God was preparing Moses for?